Hello and welcome to the Waimea Rash Guard and Swim Bottoms Sew Along. I'm Sharon Aguilar. I'm your hostess this week and I'm so glad that you have joined me for day 2. Today we are sewing our swim bottom. I am excited to get started sewing.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we have these 2 pocket pieces. Make sure that you've made a note where it attaches to the front so that you don't get mixed up which is the front seam and which is a side seam. And then we're going to put these right sides together, both pieces. And we are going to sew along this top right here. So we're not going all the way to the edge. Let me show you on the pattern piece. So when you sew on this, you're only sewing this curve and then you're going off right here. You're gonna leave this unsewn right here, this flat part at the top. And you're gonna do that on both. So just use a stretch stitch and take that either to your sewing machine or to your serger and sew a quick line of stitches right here. So at this point, you should have your front piece, your side panels, and then your 2 pockets that you have sewn at the top. You know where the side panel meets is because you've made the mark. This little marking on all of the pieces show where they meet in the middle right here. So you want to keep that lined up. It'll really help you to make sure your pieces are not off. Okay, so now we're going to flip our pockets to where the insides are touching, the wrong sides are touching. And then this part where it scoops up, you're going to match, it's going to scoop up toward the middle. So you're going to make it look like this. So I don't know if you can tell that, but I'll put my hand under it. So the scoop up goes towards the middle center. So you're going to just line that up. Make sure you like what is showing. So if you can since they're lined, you can test them out both ways and see which one is your favorite. I think my favorite is with the flower showing on the panel. Okay, so now we're gonna baste. Whenever you're sewing swim, that is the one step I say you never skip is basting, even though it's not something that is necessary for construction, meaning your garment's not gonna fall apart if you don't baste, but it's just there to make you have less of a headache whenever you're actually sewing it. Because swim fabric has a mind of its own. It likes to slip around. It doesn't want to sit still. And it's so easy if you just baste on your machine. And by basting, I mean getting your sewing machine on a straight stitch and just putting it on the longest stitch you can and then sewing this down. So we're going to do that on both. We're just going to baste this pocket to the side panel along here, and that'll allow this to function as one piece, and then we can attach it to our middle. Okay, so now I have my pocket panels ready to go. They should look like this, where you have your pocket, so they're 3 layers total, and then the swoop is towards the middle, and now we're going to just lay them right sides together with the front. We're gonna clip it right here. Do that on both sides. Clip it right here. And then we're gonna sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And after that is sewn, then we'll be able to pull it this way and we'll have our front done. Okay, so now I have this part sewn. Here is my stretch seam on the back, and I'm gonna go ahead and just top stitch mine. Definitely optional. If you do top stitch it though, you wanna push your seam towards the middle. You don't wanna top stitch it over your pocket because then you're gonna lose some of your pocket space. So I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch this. I'm gonna do it on where my needles are on the reverse side so that I have some pretty cover stitching on the front. Okay, so I, for some reason the video for this step did not save, but I'm gonna show you with the pattern pieces. So your front should be completely constructed with the pockets, and then you'll have your back cut on the fold. And what you're going to do is you're going to put them right sides together. So imagine this fully on both sides. And once you have them right sides together, you're gonna sew your side seam, and then you're also going to push this down and you're going to sew your crotch. So you're gonna notice that the crotch is not a straight across line. So you're going to need to ease, whenever you sew it, you're gonna need to ease that in. And then you're going to have a little dog-eared triangle hanging off on this part. But that's gonna be great because then when you turn it right sides together, it should be one smooth line. And you're going to do the same thing on your main, and then you're also going to sew your lining right sides together. So after you've sewn both of those right sides together, then we can baste them together. So now your bottom should look like this, and we are ready to add our lining. So you can set these aside, and you're gonna grab your 2 lining pieces. You should have a front lining that looks like this, and then you should have a back lining. So you're gonna put the lining right side up. So just feel of it and see which side that you like, the way it feels the best. Don't be so concerned with what is right and wrong, because you just wanna have the side you like the best up against your skin. And then put the side you like the best, right sides together. And we're gonna sew these just the way we sewed these together. So you're gonna line up your side seams. And then now we're gonna line up our crotch seam. And it's the exact same. The pieces are the same as the ones that you sewed before. So you're just wanting to make them even. So what I do is I kind of pivot this around until it matches. Now that I have those clipped, I'm gonna go sew those the exact same way that I sewed these. This is where you should be at. You will have a fully constructed main, and you'll have a fully constructed lining. And you're gonna leave your main with the right side facing out and leave your lining with the right side facing in. So now I'm just gonna slip this lining into the main. And you want to have the wrong sides of each touching. So that means the main is going to look like this on the inside. You're not going to have a seam showing. Your seam will be facing that. And I'm just going to clip all of the waist hole and the leg hole. I'm going to match them all up. So I'm going to match up this seam. I'm going to push one seam one way and then the other one the other, put a clip there, do it on this side. And after I get them clipped, I'm going to take them to the machine and I'm going to baste the edges together. And this is so that we can put our elastic in. When you put your elastic in, you really don't want to have these loose and just clipped, because then you're dealing with 2 fabrics that are sliding against each other and then elastic that you are stretching. And that will just get really hairy really quick. So we are gonna avoid that by just doing a really quick basting stitches. Now all the basting stitches that we're doing, we're gonna end up just removing those. I always get my seam ripper afterwards and just remove them, because I really don't, they're not necessary. They're there to just make your sewing experience more pleasurable rather than to help keep your garment constructed. I'm ready to go baste. When I baste, I like to baste outside of the seam allowance line. Like if you baste too far close to the edge, then it makes it harder to remove them, because then they're lost in your seam, and then you might accidentally end up ripping some of your actual seam that you do not want to rip. So I try and do it outside of what I think my seam line will be, just to make removing easier, but it still does the trick. You don't want to get too far outside of it. Just right next to it. Like you can see where I have these right here. Okay, so I'm gonna go work on that, and then we'll be ready to apply our leg elastics. Okay, so we are ready to put in some elastic in our leg holes. We should have everything nice and basted together. And now you're gonna go to the chart and cut out the 3/8 inch elastic that it calls for in your size. I'm using, this is just like a regular swim elastic. There's also rubber elastic. I've noticed rubber elastic is a firmer elastic. So if you notice that your elastic, the particular one you're using, doesn't have like a really easy stretch, you might want to add to that length, just based on the elastic that you're using. So once you cut out what the chart calls for, you're gonna cut out that amount, 2 strips of it. Okay, so I have the 2 strips of elastic that the chart calls for in my size, and I am going to take those and make a loop. Make sure it's not twisted. You want to keep it into an even loop like this, and then you're going to overlap it by 1/2 inch on the edge, and then we're gonna zigzag that down. So you're just gonna put this under your machine and zigzag that area closed on both of them like this. and we're gonna take it to the machine, and after we've zigzagged it, we're gonna apply it to the our leg openings. So we're gonna be putting it on the wrong side of the fabric. Start on where you're gonna be sewing on the front first. So that means that on one leg opening, you'll start in the middle right here and then go around to the front. And then on the other leg opening, you're gonna start on the side and then go around the front. The reason you wanna do the front first is because the front, you're just applying a little bit of tension. You're not really pulling it. You're just keeping it nice and even through your machine. And then whatever is left on the back, you're gonna, from this point, this crotch seam to this sideways seam, you're going to stretch it because you want more of the tension to be on the back of it. Okay, so let's go over to the machine and apply our elastic. Okay, so I'm at my machine. I'm going to start with my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a zigzag to connect these elastics. Okay, if you don't want to match your thread, because no one's going to see. And now I'm going to take it to the serger. You can use a zigzag stitch to apply this on your regular sewing machine too, so don't feel like that part. I just find it easier to do on my serger. And you're gonna see whichever seam is that you're sewing on the front first. So each leg opening is gonna be different. On one leg opening, it's gonna be on your crotch seam, and then the other leg opening, it's gonna be on your hip seam. Another thing, and when you're applying this elastic, is you want to make sure that if you leave your knife engaged, I like to leave my knife engaged because I'll cut off like this thread and stuff. But if you do, you got to really pay attention that you do not cut into your elastic. Okay, and so now I am at my the seam, my crotch seam, and I've sewn the front, and now I'm going to sew the back. And you can see, you can tell how my elastic is a lot shorter than this. So I'm gonna have to stretch. Let me back you up a little bit so you can see. So I'm gonna have to stretch this elastic to meet this. So I'm gonna pull this like this and stretch all through the bottom area, the elastic. So I have one applied. So you see how my back is nice and scrunched up and my front is nice and even. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other leg opening. You see the difference in the one with the elastic and the one without? Okay, now I am at that seam again, and I'm going to stretch all through the bottom. Okay, now I'm ready to top stitch. So you can either use your regular sewing machine and do a zigzag, or you can use your cover stitch. I'm going to remove the basting stitches on my leg openings with my seam ripper before I top stitch. Now I'm going to turn under the leg openings. So it looks like this on the back, and you're just going to turn it under. And then as you top stitch, you're gonna need to stretch it to where there's none of these little wrinkles. Because if you top stitch it like this, you're gonna top stitch all these little wrinkles into your suit. So you're gonna wanna pull it while you top stitch. And I'm gonna do the reverse cover stitch on this one. I also really like to use a zigzag on my sewing machine. I'll do it at like a 2.5 to 3 on the length and the width, and that always seems to work really well. I like to start on the crotch because that's an area that no one should be necessarily looking at. And if they are, they're not looking for flaws in your sewing. So that's a good place to start. So now I'm getting to the area where I'm gonna need to stretch it. And when you're stretching this way, I always like to kind of keep a firm hold on the back. I'm also going to decrease my stitch length, so whenever it unstretches, it doesn't look too, the stitches aren't so close together. Oh, go this way, sorry. When I say decrease, I meant increase. Okay, so I want to show you what it looks like. I think it looks a lot better where I, see this is where I first started out and was using my normal stitch length. And then this is where I'd kind of increased my stitch length along the back so that it matches the front. So whenever, if you do reverse cover stitch on your bottoms, you'll want to make your stitch length longer whenever you are stretching it on the back. So there's one done, and now I'm going to do the other side. Okay, so we should have the main part of our bottoms done, and we're ready to add a waistband. So the same process is going to apply whether or not you're using the elastic option or you're using the non-elastic option. If you're doing the fold over waistband, the only difference is, you know, obviously that this is going to be a higher waistband. So this part is going to look wider, but you're still cutting two and you're still sewing the side seams the same. The only difference is that you're not going to leave a gap in the back and whenever you attach it to the front. So the reason that we would leave a gap in the back is so that we can thread elastic through, but on this one, you don't need to thread any elastic through it. Okay, so to do our waistband, we're gonna sew our side seams. After you sew your side seams, you're gonna press this side down. The same thing on both bands. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and sew that with a stretch stitch on my serger. So now I have my bottoms and I have my waistband. I'm gonna fold the waistband to where only the pretty sides are showing. You're gonna fold it like this. If you're doing the fold over, yours is gonna be a lot taller than this. And then after you do that, you're going to, oh, well, before I put it on there, one more step, you wanna mark your quarter points. If you didn't mark when you were cutting it out where the center point was, you want to do that now. It'll help you whenever you stretch it. So just make a little mark. So make the seam lines meet and then make marks to remind yourself where the center is between those. And then you want to make sure you've done the same on your front. I did it on my back when I was cutting it out, but I forgot to do it on the front. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. Okay, so whichever band we are using, you are going to be folding it to where the wrong sides are together after you've marked your 4 quarter points. And I'm going to put the seam on the back. So this, oh, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to put the seams on the side since there's 2. If there was just one, I'd put it on the back. So I'll match up this seam line with this, put a clip there, and then do the same thing on this one, and then match up my halfway point with this quarter point. And then now I'm going to sew this all in the round. I'm going to sew this on. And if you are doing the fold over, then you just sew it completely. But if you're going to be doing the waistband that requires elastic, you'll want to leave a 2-inch gap at the back, and then we'll thread elastic through. And there are your bottoms. And then after you're done, you can top stitch the seam down onto the bottoms after you've sewn that. Okay, so I used my serger to serge on this band, and I left my gap in the back just so that I can fish in my elastic. And now I'm going to turn it up. And now you can see all of my basting stitches, so I'm going to remove those. And I'm also, after I remove those, I'm going to try these on. And then when I try them on, I'm going to measure exactly where my waistband is sitting on my body. And I'm going to subtract 2 inches from that. And that will give me my elastic measurement. It's so much easier to do it with these on your body, because when they're not on your body, you're kind of guessing where that waistband would be. But if you put them on with this waistband on, you'll know exactly how much, you'll know exactly where to measure so that your calculations for your elastic are more accurate. So measure that, and whatever it is, you're going to subtract 2 inches, and then we will feed it through this hole. So you'll want to get a safety pin to feed that through. Okay, so now I have my elastic cut out, and it's 2 inches less than my measurement. And I have attached a safety pin, and I'm just going to fish it through this opening right here. Okay, so now that you have it all the way fished through, you're gonna make sure it's even, that it didn't get twisted anywhere while you were doing that. And then you're gonna overlap the ends. And then we're just gonna do some zigzags on our regular sewing machine to keep the overlapped ends together. And then we'll put it all the way into our casing, and then we can close this gap that we had left to insert our elastic. Okay, so I closed up the gap in the back that I had left open, and my elastic is all in. Now, the only thing that you have left is you want to tack this elastic down. So you're either going to want to put your seam allowance down and top stitch underneath your seam allowance. So you would just top stitch the seam allowance down to the body of your bottoms, or you can just go onto your side seam and just kind of stitch along here with a stretch stitch, so that it kind of hides it that way if you don't want the visible top stitching on yours. And that's just so that your elastic doesn't flip around a lot and roll on you.